Whether you just got into lifting or you've been training consistently for years, you might be aware of a paradox that going after maximum numbers seems to limit the development of your physique and muscle, while focusing on just hypertrophy or muscle size development doesn't seem to deliver the ultimate strength numbers that you want. Well, research shows that beyond the novice stage, strength and size gains follow fundamentally different pathways. Today, we're talking about the science-backed differences between training for maximal strength versus optimal muscle growth and how to program for both without compromising either. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that helps you build a strong, healthy physique using evidence, engineering, and efficiency. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and today I'm going to address one of the most misunderstood relationships in fitness, the connection between strength and hypertrophy, the fancy word for muscle growth. And I want to give a shout out to my lifting buddy, Tony, you know who you are, as well as my client, Len, who have pushed me recently to cover this topic in depth. And it's a good one because I see this confusion constantly with clients in our online communities where people ask, should I lift heavy to get stronger, or should I use lighter weights or more reps to build muscle? Or they'll say, I'm getting stronger, but I'm not seeing much size increase or development of my physique. Or conversely, I look bigger, but my lifts aren't really going up that much. And the separation between these two training goals, it's not as black and white as many believe, like the old school, strength is 1 to 5 reps and hypertrophy is 8 to 12 and so on. There is significant overlap, but there are also significant differences in how you should approach each one. And understanding this relationship is critical to design an effective program, or at least choose a program so that it gives you the specific results you want. Now, if you want to put these principles into action immediately, I've definitely got something special for you today because I'm giving away a complete set of my physique and strength focused workout programs from Wits and Weights Physique University, totally free, giving you the whole thing for the current month for all skill levels, all types of equipment. There are swaps, there's video links in there, there are instructions, novice, intermediate, glutes and legs. There are a lot of different programs, and they're the exact programs that our WWPU members can choose from, including a built-in log, exercise substitutions for home and travel, you name it. So just go to witsandweights.com/free or click the link in the show notes. If you go to our website, just look for physique focused programs, I think it's called. But just click the link in the show notes to get a free copy of that today. All right, so let's clear up the confusion between strength and hypertrophy training once and for all, making this the definitive episode on the topic. First, let's define what the heck we're talking about. Strength training primarily focuses on increasing your ability to generate maximal force, how much weight you can lift for low reps, ideally for 1 rep, the most you can lift for 1 rep, but in that range. So think about powerlifting competitions where athletes perform 1 rep at the heaviest possible weight for their deadlift, their squat, and their bench press. And this is something I didn't understand for many, many years. And once I did and focused on it when I was a beginner, the gains started to take off and it opened up a whole world of learning and understanding about this. But then at some point you start to hit a wall and you're like, why am I not getting stronger? Or why am I not getting the physique I want? So hypertrophy training, on the other hand, in somewhat contrast to strength, emphasizes increasing muscle size using the ultimate principle, which is mechanical tension. And it's often by doing it through moderate, I'll call it moderate weights. I don't like to say light weights. It's just moderate weights. It's sub-maximal or far from your max for mid to higher tier rep ranges, like 6 to 15, up to 20, even up to 30. That's what I'm saying, is there's quite a wide range where this can be effective. Now, the interesting part here is that if you look at the science, we see that these adaptations share a fundamental driver, and that is mechanical tension, which I just mentioned in the context of hypertrophy. But the way your body responds to this tension is going to differ based on load, volume, and other variables. And here is where the 65% threshold becomes important. I think this is really important, so listen up. Research consistently shows that to build maximal strength, you generally, this is a combination of the research, need to train with at least 65% of your 1 rep max. Okay, that is 65% of your max. This is an intensity threshold that ensures that you have sufficient neural, right, your nervous system, neural recruitment and adaptation. But if you're just trying to build muscle, and I say that in quotes, we're going to get to the differences and the overlaps, you can potentially go as low as 30% of your 1 rep max, provided that you are training close to failure. You're still leveraging the principle of mechanical tension either way. So I want to explain why this happens through the lens of the research. So in the early stages of strength gains, this is when you're a complete beginner or a novice or even a late novice, most improvement comes from neurological adaptations, not muscle growth. Your central nervous system, your CNS, becomes more efficient at recruiting muscle fibers and synchronizing your motor units. And studies show that in novice lifters, increases in muscle size might explain as little as 2% of the variance in strength gains. That's pretty telling, right? That tells you that it doesn't have much to do with muscle at all, because nearly all strength improvement comes from better neural efficiency and technique. And this is why you can gain massive strength very quickly early on, because you don't need to grow new muscle tissue to get there. You're simply training your body to coordinate better effectively. So you guys probably know Dr. Eric Helms, one of the guys I follow. He's a natural bodybuilder. He's a researcher, always on the podcast circuit, Stronger by Science, Mass, all that good stuff. And he explains this phenomenon very clearly. He says when you first start training, your body already has the muscle it needs to lift considerably more weight than it currently can. And so the limiting factor is not your muscle size, but your nervous system's ability to recruit and coordinate the muscles. And that's where beginners, again, can double their strength, but have minimal visible muscle gain. And it can be both exhilarating because your numbers are going up and frustrating because your physique isn't quite changing yet. And then as you become more advanced, the relationship shifts very dramatically. For experienced lifters, muscle mass then becomes critical for further strength gains. You've heard of, working on your weak spots, for example, and it potentially explains 65% or more of the variability in strength increases. Okay, listen to what I just said. When you're more advanced, muscle mass becomes more relevant for strength. So in other words, once you've optimized your nervous system and your lifting technique, getting stronger largely means building bigger muscles. And so the chicken and egg is always confusing here because it's like, which one supports the other? The answer is yes. And this explains why elite powerlifters are also quite jacked. They're quite muscular, right? They have to be. Even if aesthetics isn't their primary goal. And you might see the big guys who carried a lot of extra weight, they then cut down because their goals change. Maybe they even go into bodybuilding. And I won't say it's easy for them because it's going to depend on their shape and their symmetry as well. But you see that fat fall off and they've got tons of muscle, slabs and slabs of meat on their frame. And so at advanced levels, more muscle becomes necessary to continue breaking strength plateaus. Really, really important because I think people get stuck in the mindset of doing the same, 3x5 program forever. And they are leaving lots of potential gains on the table, even for their strength. So now that we understand the relationship between strength and size, kind of at a high level, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here. There's so much evidence and research out there that you could explore. I want to talk about how training variables differ between strength-focused and hypertrophy-focused programs. And again, we're going to get to where these overlap and how you can incorporate a little of both. But I want to start with intensity, right? Probably the most important variable that I learned early on, especially when you're getting started. Intensity is not sweating or feel. Intensity is just the load on the bar. It's how heavy you lift relative to your maximum in this context. All right. So for strength development, research is clear on this. Lifting heavier weights is superior. And that means working at 80 to 100% of your 1RM for your core compound lifts. The heavy weight forces maximal motor unit recruitment from the first rep. That's what's important here. And it trains your nervous system to handle near maximum loads. And you can go down other rabbit holes and argue about intensity versus volume. I think both are extremely important. I think using intensity and then jacking that up with volume is a great approach, or going a little bit less intense and making up for in volume, or a little bit more intense and a little bit less volume. It all works. And in some cases, you cycle through both within one training block. Very common. I just increased all of my max lifts doing that. I had a base phase where I had lots of volume, sub-maximal, but then I switched to a peaking phase where I was in the 80 to 90% range with much less volume to train my nervous system to get ready to hit those max singles, which eventually I did. And it actually felt pretty easy when you take the right approach. So that's strength. Now, for hypertrophy, the intensity range is much broader, which is kind of neat because if you don't care, I'll say care about your max PRs, and you just want to look better, you want to build muscle, you want to be generally fit and strong, but not strong in terms of the maximum strength, a hypertrophy approach can be helpful and flexible. It can give you a lot of flexibility because the evidence confirms that muscle growth occurs effectively from as low as 30% up to 85% of your 1RM, as long as the sets are approaching muscular failure. And the key factor here, again, is mechanical tension, not necessarily how heavy the weight feels. And that's a distinction because some people, I have to be honest, are not training hard enough. And the most recent program I ran, and I have one of my programs in the Physique University that is inspired by Alex Bromley. He has a volume-based approach, but the key is he uses AMRAP sets while building that strength base so that you can tell whether you are heavy enough on your load and you're pushing hard enough without having to rely on subjective feel. And I think objectivity is a really helpful tool throughout this process. A 2017 meta-analysis by Brad Schoenfeld found that when sets are taken to momentary failure, muscle hypertrophy gains are similar across a wide range of loads. However, and this is really important, maximal strength was not equal across rep ranges. So let me just repeat that. When you take sets to failure just for a moment, you're going to gain hypertrophy no matter the load. At least it's when it's above this 30% threshold. But your strength isn't the same across different rep ranges. The same review found that heavy load training produced significantly greater 1RM strength gains than light load training. It's not really a surprise to those of us that have done this and trained with this, but it's important to understand that that is the case. That is where some of the differences exist. The second major difference is volume. For hypertrophy, total volume, which is your sets times reps, you could also say times load because that gives you your tonnage. And remember, we are talking about vastly different load levels, so it's important to have that in there. Volume is a primary driver of growth. Meta-analysis indicate that multiple sets per exercise yield more hypertrophy than single set training, and higher weekly sets per muscle group, usually around 10 to 20, tend to produce more growth than lower volumes. Now, I've said before that as low as 5 to 10 can still get you a lot of the gains that you want, but it's not optimal. It's not going to get you the most. And for those of you really serious about this that are putting in the work, just understand you generally need about 10 to 20 sets per week. And again, that's a pretty well-established range that gets talked about in the industry by now. And it holds up based on the research. So that's volume for hypertrophy. Now, strength training, even though you do need adequate volume, it places greater emphasis on intensity over volume, right? You can't do as many sets with near maximal weights without your performance tanking and having recovery issues and tons of fatigue. And that's where quality becomes more important than quantity. And that is why, again, to go back to the program I just ran, when I was building the base, I was far sub-maximal. I was around 65, 70, 75% of my max, doing more volume. And then as I got closer to my test, I ramped down the volume and increased the intensity. Another thing that changes quite a bit is the rest periods. Strength training typically uses longer rest intervals between your heavy sets, 3 to 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes, sometimes even longer for super heavy, let's say deadlifts. And this allows for your ATP CP, this is the adenosine triphosphate, creatine phosphate energy system to replenish itself, right? It gets depleted very quickly, it also allows your central nervous system to recover. And now you can go after maximal performance on each set, which is ultimately the goal. Whereas traditional muscle mass or hypertrophy training often uses shorter rests. 60 seconds, minute and a half, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I usually like 2 to 3 minutes for most, unless you are intentionally going after building your work capacity or doing a superset or circuit style training where you are just trying to get to those near failure reps quickly. And the theory here is you're trying to increase your metabolic stress. However, important here, current evidence suggests that longer rest intervals, even with hypertrophy, can actually enhance the muscle growth because they allow you to have more training volume. And this goes back to the volume versus intensity versus effective reps arguments. A study by Schoenfeld compared 1 minute versus 3 minute rests in a hypertrophy program and found that the group that used the longer 3 minute rests achieved significantly larger muscle thickness gains. The last thing here is exercise selection is a pretty important variable. Strength programs are going to focus heavily on compound lifts, compound movements that allow for maximal loading. These are the lifts where you use multiple joints for maximum use of muscle mass and loading. And that would be your squat, your bench press, your overhead press, your deadlifts, your even rows and things like that. Whereas accessory work is also chosen primarily to improve these main lifts rather than necessarily build muscle. So those might be developmental or targeted variations of the squat, the bench, the dead, the overhead, etc. Hypertrophy programs can still be centered or foundational around compound lifts, so don't think that it just excludes them. And when we say compound lifts, we also have to expand our vocabulary to include all the variations of compound lifts. Like a Romanian deadlift is still a compound lift. A pull-up is still a compound lift. However, hypertrophy programs will also include more isolation exercises to target specific muscles from multiple angles. A bodybuilder might do flat bench, incline bench, decline bench, flies for chest development. They might do them all in one day with a body part split. A power lifter, on the other hand, might just do their flat bench and maybe 1 or 2 variations both on or on a different day, like their other upper body day, to address weak spots, and might have some other work in there. And that's the big caveat, that there is a big overlap here. Because when you look at Louis Simmons and the West Side guys, and again, I know they were equipped, they were enhanced and all that, but if you look at something like the conjugate method, or really any power building program, you do see a combination of both, with the theory that one enhances the other. So I want to translate this science into practical guidelines for your training based on your primary goal. And this is going to be a really important episode to come back to when you're wondering if the program you're looking at or the program you're designing is meeting the goals you intend. So if your main objective is maximal strength, maybe you are a competitive powerlifter, maybe you just want to be as strong as possible. And by the way, you can cycle through going after strength, going after muscle, doing a little both. If your objective is strength, here's how I would structure your training. I would center your workouts on compound lifts using primarily the, let's say, 1 to 6 rep range at 80 to 90% of your 1RM when you get close to hitting your PR. That doesn't mean you're always working in the 80 to 90%. And that's one of the many caveats I have to give you here, because you're probably going to want to add some volume at lower percentages of your max as you build to those lower rep ranges. And we see this in some of the classic programs like 531, 852, where you're cycling through slightly higher rep ranges, slightly sub-max, and then you're getting more intense at lower reps, and then you're cycling through those. You're also going to take long rest periods. And by long, I mean longer than you're probably used to, but sufficient to increase quality as much as possible. Quality is more important than quantity here. So at least, bare minimum, 3 to 5 minutes between your heavy sets. You're going to focus on quality over quantity. And that just means that your form, it should always be important. But when it comes to really heavy lifts, you've really got to be dialed in on your form. This usually means get a coach who knows what the heck they're talking about, which is also hard to find sometimes. But get a coach. You know, a starting strength coach is a great idea Even if you're not doing starting strength, they can help you out. You can definitely reach out to me. I can refer you to people locally or online. There are good people. There are good groups where you can do form checks. I think quality is really important because you're only doing, let's say, 3 to 5 sets, and you're not doing that many reps, but you're really heavy, and you've got to make sure those reps are done well. The next thing I think about with strength training for strength, is training with explosive intent. Really important. Listen to me here. This is not wishy-washy. Even though the weight is moving slowly, you're going to try to move it as fast as possible on the concentric. Like in a squat, that's the up part of the squat. When you're driving up with your hips, you are going to explode into that movement. You're going to at least think that way to maximize your motor unit recruitment. This is important. This is something I didn't understand for a while. You know, a lot gets talked about tempo and time under tension, which, by the way, is not a thing that is effective at all, time under tension. But explosive concentric movement is important. The eccentric, it can vary. It depends on what you're going for. It depends on if you're going to have a pause in there and everything. But the explosive intent is important. Avoid training to failure. That is another important thing. Your programming should be designed where you are somewhat sub-max, but still heavy, and doing the right amount of reps so that you're at least probably 2 or 3, if not 4 reps shy of failure. Now, 4 reps shy of failure, that is quote unquote 6 RPE. And I never use RPE as a training variable. I only use it as a lagging indicator, as a metric to evaluate how you did on something, but not as a metric to tell you how you should do something. That's where I differ from some folks. But you want to stop short of, you don't want to be in a total grind where it's an utter failure on your main lifts. The only time that should really ever happen is if you are testing a 1 rep max. Then there's a chance it could happen, right? That's just because you're really trying to push to your max ever. And then here's the other thing people miss. Okay, beyond the novice phase, you want to have strategic accessory work in there because you're going to have weaknesses and you have propensity for injury when you're constantly doing the same lifts and you haven't used variations of those lifts to try to shore up your weak spots. You're going to keep getting kind of stronger in the primary muscle groups involved in that movement while everything else kind of lags. And we don't want that. And that's why there is always a case to be made for some variety once you get past the novice stage. So that's my thoughts on strength training. And again, those are principles. I noticed I didn't give you an actual program because there's a million ways to do that. But I will suggest a few things later on. If your primary goal is hypertrophy, you want to look bigger, you want to look more muscular, right? Many of us want that. Even if we are trying to push big lifts, we still want that as well. Here's what I suggest. You're going to use a blend, a mix of compound and isolation exercises. So this is where you've got to have some targeted work in there to hit muscles from different angles. You're going to work in a wide variety of rep ranges. You're going to work probably predominantly in the middle, like 6 to 12, which is equivalent to about 60 to 80% of your 1RM. Notice that's still pretty heavy, but you're going to include some lower rep work, 3 to 5 potentially, which sounds like strength, doesn't it? And higher rep work, 12 to 20. I mean, if you're doing a leg press, 15, 20 reps, believe it or not, can be super, super effective. That or a hack squat or something like that. And it's still going to feel pretty darn heavy and hard with all those reps. Doing lots of reps is its own mental challenge compared to doing lower reps but heavy. And then you're going to take these sets pretty close to failure most of the time. If you're working in the low rep range, like 3 to 5, you still may be more in that strength mindset of leaving a little bit in the tank. It should be, 2, 3, 4 reps. But with most of your other stuff, your accessories, and especially your isolation movements, you're probably going to be around 1 to 3 reps of failure. You're rarely going to go all the way to failure, but it's totally doable to do that with something like bicep curls, where you keep going, and you literally cannot get another technical rep, and then you failed. And that's okay. But there are some things where you don't want to do that. And then we mentioned volume. Volume is really important here because you want to accumulate enough volume to grow your muscles. So that is 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. If you're time starved, if you just have to be as efficient as possible, going as low as 5 could give you some results, but they're not going to be optimal. So 10 to 20 is solid. The rest periods are going to be, in general, 2 to 3 minutes, but some may be as low as a minute or even 30 seconds, some small isolation work. Or, of course, if you're doing things like drop sets, myo reps, rest pause sets, things that I'm not even going to get to detail on here, but a lot of the fun bodybuilding stuff supersets, and so on. They are very time efficient ways to train and still get a similar result, but fit more work into less time. But generally, I'm thinking 2 to 3 minutes. So if I'm going to do pull-ups, I'm going to rest 2 to 3 minutes. If I'm doing moderately heavy barbell curls, I'm going to go 2 to 3 minutes. Now, if I'm doing 20 reps of dumbbell hammer curls with rest pause sets, well, those by definition are going to be probably only about 30 seconds. You're also going to, when you do bodybuilding or hypertrophy type work, there is sometimes a benefit to having a really controlled eccentric, that's the lowering phase. Now, this is not because of time under tension. This is more so that you get that pause in the bottom and that stretch in the lengthened position. And it also makes it a little bit harder to come back. You're taking out the stretch reflex. I found that's really good for tendons and connective tissue as well. So one of the things I've learned a lot from injuries and surgeries is the value of pausing. And when I do, for example, an easy bar curl, I don't just go all the way down and just smack it back up, back and forth, like bouncing out of the bottom. I go all the way down, almost fully unlocked. I don't go all the way 100% unlocked, but pretty close to it where it's a very stretched bicep. I pause for a half second and then go again. It's not like I'm waiting down there for a minute, but try it out. It will make it a little harder. You will have to drop the load slightly, but you'll get a very effective workout. And then, of course, you want to train each muscle group at least twice per week. And this is more of the frequency variable that we didn't really touch on yet. We talked about intensity, we talked about volume, but frequency is also important. And you're going to want to hit every muscle group at least twice a week, not necessarily directly, right? If you hit triceps one day and you're doing close grip bench the other day, you hit your triceps twice. So directly and indirectly, but at least once directly and then at least twice or more directly or indirectly, total. Now, that's strength and that's hypertrophy. But where most people get confused is, well, I want both. Like, I want to have my cake and eat it too. and you kind of can, okay? This is where power building comes in, the quote unquote power building. And I have no problem with the term. Some people roll their eyes. Oh, power building, what is that? I don't think we have to judge the term, just define what it means. And so I think it's an excellent approach for intermediate lifters. I got introduced to it through my coach, Andy Baker. He's been on the show like 3 times. I think he has the record for being on the show. And since then, I've discovered lots of other coaches who have a similar style approach to programming. It's a lot of fun. It covers both strength and hypertrophy, both styles. It helps you learn a lot about your form, about lifts, about how to program for yourself, about how to manage fatigue and recovery. I'm like a walking sales pitch for it because I think like let's say the guys I identify with in their 40s who don't have a crap ton of time, they have some time and they dedicate time to training for sure, maybe 4 days a week for an hour and a half, but they want to get both. And they're like, well, if I just focus on going after max PRs, my muscle development's going to lag. If I just go after bodybuilding, I'm going to not get those PRs that I really want. Okay, you can combine both. And so to do that, you're usually going to start your training session with a heavy compound lift or 2 in that strength regime. 3 to 6 rep range, maybe you're cycling through, whatever. You're then going to follow it with some accessory or targeted developmental work that gets you a little bit of hypertrophy, a little bit of strength support, right? It works on your weak spots, but also maybe you're in the 8 to 12 range for some muscle growth as well. And it really depends on the movement. Some parts of your work training block, you might be doing goblet squats as your variation. Others, you might be doing safety bar, heel elevated squats. And one might be more fatiguing than the other. So you're going to have to judge how many sets you're going to end up doing, how much rest you need, and what rep ranges you work in. And then you're going to include both strength-specific exercises to support the competition lifts, basically, but also bodybuilding style isolation work. So it's sort of the whole gamut, kind of like a spectrum, and it usually looks like compound, accessory, isolation, each of those being 1 or 2 lifts. So a total of anywhere from 3 to 6, 7, or 8 lifts, depending on how much time you have and how many sets you're doing, how much volume you can take, how much recoverability you have. And then you're going to periodize your training over time. You might spend part of that time, let's say 4 to 8 weeks, not really doing many of the main lifts, but just doing a lot of accessory versions of them and emphasizing hypertrophy. But then you might spend 4 to 8 weeks really just focusing a lot on the big lifts. And again, nothing precludes you from going all in on strength for a while and all in on hypertrophy for a while. And all of this stuff recognizes the fundamental truth that strength and size complement each other, and you will be better for it if you do cycle through. I am not talking about program hopping. I'm talking about spending a methodical, dedicated length of time in one mode, learn about it, grow from it, get everything you can from it, and then say, okay, I have achieved some level of growth that is meaningful to me. Now I'm going to go and work on a different part of my growth, because that kind of variety itself can be very powerful. More muscles does give you greater strength potential. Getting stronger does allow you to use heavier weights for your hypertrophy work. And so it creates a virtuous positive feedback loop. I'm experiencing that right now. I just hit my maxes last week, my squat, bench, and dead. And now I'm back to doing a little bit more power building. And I'm finding that I'm way stronger in a bunch of my accessory and isolation lifts. Well, great. What does that allow me to do? That allows me to build more muscle from those. You can't just stay stuck in one. One of the guys I follow, he was on the show. He owns Macrofactor, is part of Stronger by Science, is Greg Nuckols. You guys know Greg Nuckols. If not, look him up. Great guy. Respected, very respected strength researcher. He nerds out on this stuff. And he summarizes this strength hypertrophy relationship perfectly. He said, early on in training, muscle mass explains only a few percent of strength gains, and in experienced lifters, it can explain 65% or more. And I mentioned that earlier, and I wanted to reiterate it here in a single quote. All right? When you start, you've got to get strong, and as you get more experience, you can do a little of both. And this shows why an integrated approach is going to yield the best result when you become more advanced. And more advanced doesn't take long to get to. If you do this right, your novice phase might be 6 months long, maybe 9 months, maybe a year max, but then you're an intermediate lifter. Then you go after it. So as we clarify this relationship between strength and hypertrophy, I want to address some of the mistakes and misconceptions that could be holding you back right now listening to this, because you've heard it over and over in the fitness industry and it's just plain wrong. Okay, the first one is this notion that you must train super heavy to build muscle. Now, I respect the Starting Strength guys, Mark Ripito. I came through that world. It changed my life. Everyone should buy Starting Strength. In fact, I think Starting Strength is a phenomenal beginner program for anybody to follow. And if you just follow it, you're going to be golden. However, there is a lot of discussion about how only training that way is sufficient to build muscle. And I know they don't always mean that. What they're saying is for novices, don't worry about building muscle. Just get strong and the muscle's going to follow. And that is true. I do agree with that. But if your goal is to build muscle, you don't necessarily need the heavy, close to maximal load training. Research definitively shows that moderate weights as low as 30% of your 1RM can build just as much muscle as heavy weights, provided the sets are taken near failure. The key is always, again, mechanical tension and effort, not absolute load. And this is great news if you just want to enjoy the process of building muscle. You have joint issues, maybe you have limited equipment that you can't get to those loads. You're just not interested in maximal strength. Now, I still think that's going to limit you long term in terms of overall size and muscle development, but you're still going to build a ton of muscle. The second thing is the idea that you can get as strong as possible without focusing on building muscle. And I don't think the research supports that. I think early on, getting as strong as possible is the way to go. It's very efficient. It's what you need, because beginners can get stronger through neural adaptations without much increase in size, but advanced lifters almost universally need more muscle to keep getting stronger. If you've been training for years and your strength has plateaued, then focusing on hypertrophy for a while might be exactly what you need. And I hear it anecdotally every day. Somebody says, look, I took a break from going after PRs. I worked on a more well-rounded training program for muscular development. I came back and a lot of my lifts increased. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to directly translate to a specific lift right away, but it's going to allow you to get to new levels of maximal strength. And I think that's an important caveat or an important nuance in that, for example, the program that I just ran, I didn't just start right away in triples, doubles, and singles in the hopes that I was going to get new PRs. No, I actually took a step back and I did more volume to get exposed to the movement patterns while being in more of a hypertrophy range. And then I started to shift more toward the strength range as it supported my strength. And then I could hit new numbers. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. The third big myth is that getting a pump, feeling the burn, getting sore means an effective hypertrophy workout. I am all for getting a pump. It's fun. It is fun. And you will get sore when you're exposed to a movement for the first time or two. That's totally normal. And while metabolic stress contributes a little bit to growth, again, mechanical tension is the primary driver. The more research has come out, the more we've discovered that's the case. A workout that leaves you pumped and sore is not necessarily better for muscle growth than one focused on progressively loading, using good form, and getting that mechanical tension. And you're hitting mechanical tension when you're somewhat close to failure and you're actually able to lift more the next time. I mean, that's a really good indicator that you're getting it, not that you're sore, that you're getting a pump, etc. And then another misconception is thinking that bodybuilders are not strong or that powerlifters don't care about muscle. Because at the elite level, I've talked to these guys directly or on the podcast, or I've listened to them. There's a lot more specialization at the elite level. And most successful bodybuilders are super strong. They could not get to the size they are without being strong. Most accomplished powerlifters, they've built tons of muscle mass. Just stop trying to separate them as if they are in separate vacuums. They are not. The difference in those athletes, their training emphasis and their competition goals cause them to train a bit differently, but their fundamental physiological adaptations are the same. The last thing I want to say that is super important and useful. Program hopping is not going to help you. Program hopping between strength and hypertrophy approaches, like really quickly within just like a few weeks at a time, without giving it either time to work, is going to set you back for years. You're just going to be stuck. You've got to give it time and you have to have patience. Both strength and size development require consistently training, showing up to the gym, progressive loading over time, over months and over years, period. I'm sorry to say it, but I'm not sorry, because once you get into it and you realize how fun the process itself can be, you are not fixated on that final number. There is no final number. I look back every year and I say, well, I wanted to accomplish X and I realize I accomplished Y, and Y might be more or less than X and it might be different than X, but I've grown, and that's really important. And then you learn from that. But if you jump between programs every few weeks, you're not going to have the accumulation of adaptations, of volume, of even frequency needed for significant progress. So stop doing it. So now that we've covered the science and the practice, I want to give you one more thing that might change how you view your training career. And that's what it is. If you're listening to Wits and Weights, strength training should be at the top of your list. Numero uno. It is the driver of body composition more than anything else. Whether you're trying to lose fat, build muscle, whatever, look great, feel great, get lean. The relationship between strength and hypertrophy is going to change dramatically based on how long you've been training. So I want you to think about this, your training career. When you're a beginner, a lot of you are, you're listening to me, you're thinking, I got to get off the couch, I got to start training. Or maybe I used to work out years ago, I've got to get back to it. Or maybe I've been going to the gym for 10 years, but I'm not really getting the results. You're a beginner. You are a beginner. If you don't feel like right now you are constantly getting stronger and growing and building muscle, you're doing something wrong and you're a beginner. And that's okay. I envy you because you could now, doing it the right way, get jacked and strong so quickly. And so beginners want to focus primarily on getting stronger in that moderate rep range. I'll say 4 to 6 to really narrow it down for you, right? 5s are classically thrown out there because of starting strength and what is it called? Strong lifts, 5x5, all of those. But even like 5 to 10, through compound lifts, you're just going to get so strong and you're going to build some size. Once you get past that first few weeks of neuromuscular efficiency and actually start adding new muscle, it is the most efficient path, period. The neurological adaptations come quickly. They call them newbie gains. The moderate volume provides enough stimulus for initial growth. And then you have a lot of frequency in that you are like squatting every session. You're deadlifting every session, and you can do that. Don't think that you need to squat once every 2 weeks. You're not advanced enough to do that. You need to do it frequently. So a program like Starting Strength, as mentioned before, is ideal for this. And if I remember to do so, I'm going to throw a link in. No, you know what? I'm not going to throw a link in my show notes. I already have a link to the workout programs from Physique University in the show notes. And in that file, all you have to do is ask for it. You'll download it. In that file, if you go to the novice tab, it actually mentions starting strength, and it points you to resources, a walkthrough that I've done on it, all the things you need to know. It's all in there, okay? And I give you other options for novice programs as well. These things will produce strength and visible muscle gains if you're a novice, and those first 6, 9, 12 months are magical. If you do it consistently, if you eat enough, if you sleep enough. It's amazing. I am jealous for you. You've got to get on that right now. Now, for intermediates who have been training for, say, 1 to 3 years, seriously, doing it the right way, using a barbell, using heavy implements, whatever it takes to get stronger from wherever you were, wherever you started. Power building, I think, is great. I think the power building approach might be, I don't want to say yields the quote unquote best results. That's a subjective statement, but it gives you enough heavy work to keep developing that neurological efficiency and keep those movement patterns in there, but also sufficient volume, variety, frequency of smaller isolation work to continue building muscle. So it's a nice blend if you have the time and the inclination for it. It's also a lot of fun. I think it's a great way to just keep yourself motivated. And now if you're more advanced than that, if you're pushing 4, 5, 6 years of serious progressive training, getting strong, building muscle, you're going to need greater specialization, period. Your nervous system adaptations have pretty much tapped out. They've maxed out. Further strength gains are going to correlate very heavily on increasing your muscle size, as we've mentioned a couple times already. I mean, this is why elite powerlifters include distinct hypertrophy blocks in their training cycle. This is why Westside has powerbuilding / hypertrophy work constantly in there. They've got speed work. They've got bands and chains, accommodating resistance, all of this specialization. You know, you may have a part of your body that does not respond as quickly as others. Maybe it's your biceps. Maybe it's your back. Maybe it's your calves, guys. You know, the calves are tough for a lot of us. Maybe it's your glutes. Whatever it is that you want to get bigger, you might have to specialize. You might need more frequency or a more targeted approach. And so, you know, when you just look at competitive powerlifters, including those in, you understand why. And conversely, bodybuilders, right, who are advanced bodybuilders, they're going to spend time in some strength periods in the off season when they're eating, when they're not dieting, right? Because dieting is a big part of bodybuilding leading up to a competition. But in the improvement season, the off season, they're going to be pushing their strength in the key lifts, not to mention the accessories and the isolation work. They want to be able to handle heavier weights. They want to have better connective tissue and joint and joint health and ability to handle their fatigue and their recovery. And they might not test their 1RMs all the time, but they will track their strength to ensure that they're actually improving and getting stronger. So the surprising truth, I'll say, is that for most of us who I would call enthusiasts or recreational lifters, the goals of strength and hypertrophy are not competing. They're complementary. And if you know how to balance and periodize both types of training, kind of like we balance and periodize fat loss and muscle building phases, calorie deficits and calorie surpluses. And it's based on your experience level, based on the year, time of year, based on your personal preferences and enjoyment, based on how much stress you have right now, based on how much recoverability you have, based on your diet itself. Your diet and your training actually go hand in hand as to which one you focus on when. If you're trying to max out your PRs, you probably should be doing that while you're eating a bunch of food and sleeping, right? Not in a dieting phase. You're just not going to. So if you can do that, you can achieve impressive gains in both. And you're not going to sacrifice either. You're not. It's going to work out. It really will. And isn't that liberating to know that you do not have to choose between being strong and looking strong, right? If you have smart programming, you can have both. So the next time that you are designing your training program or evaluating whether you should follow this strength-focused program here, this power building program here, this hypertrophy program here, remember a few things from this episode and re-review this episode. I think it's important. Number one, both strength and hypertrophy training rely on mechanical tension, but they optimize different aspects of it. Number two is that strength requires heavier loads, usually up above 65% of your 1RM, ideally around 80% or higher, to maximize the neural adaptations, the movement patterns. Number three is that hypertrophy can occur across a much broader range of loads, as low as 30% of your 1RM, as long as you're training hard, as long as your effort is sufficient to get close to failure to get that mechanical tension. Number four, if you're a beginner, get strong. Get strong in the compound movements, ideally with a barbell. Number 5, if you're an intermediate, blend heavy strength work with hypertrophy work and kind of work them both in a power building style. That's usually an efficient way to do it. And then number 6, if you're advanced, you've got to specialize and recognize that size and strength will always continue to be interconnected. So I want you to understand the science at this point is pretty clear. We're not really fuzzy on this. If you understand the relationship between strength and hypertrophy, you can train more intelligently and efficiently, saving time, avoiding the confusion that plagues so many lifters out there that do not have a clue. And if you think you don't have a clue, listen to this episode at least 2 times and reach out for help. Go download my programs. Join Wits and Weights Physique University. We'll help you figure it all out. And by applying these evidence-based principles, that's what they are. They're principles. It's not specific methods or programs. It's principles. If you can apply them, you're going to optimize your results. You will. I guarantee it. It's physics. It's biology. It's going to work. Whether your goal is to lift more weight, build more muscle, or both. All right, so if you're ready to put these principles into action, because that is what you need next, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, you need action. I've created a complete set of strength and physique focused workout programs from Wits and Weights Physique University. We drop a new set every month, and I'm giving you the latest month if you use the link in my show notes. And I've got programs in there for novice, intermediate, advanced, different levels of equipment, different days per week. The programs incorporate both strength and hypertrophy elements, and they give you balanced development depending on where you are in your training age. There's a built-in log, there's exercise substitutions, there's links to videos. It's got everything, guys. What are you waiting for? It's totally free. Go to witsandweights.com/free, or better yet, just click the link in the show notes to download your free copy today. Until next time, keep using your wits, lifting those weights, and remember, with the right training approach, you don't have to choose between being strong and looking strong. You can have both. I'll talk to you next time here on the Wits and Weights podcast.